Special, a 24-hour Ozzy live stream featuring some of our favorite Ozzy and Black Sabbath videos from the Audiomover archives. Now, if you're new to the channel, Audiomover is all about the stories behind classic rock. We have hundreds of videos covering the albums, bands, concerts, magazines, and moments that helped shape rock and heavy metal. My favorite subject has always been Black Sabbath, so you'll find plenty of Sabbath and Ozzy throughout our channel. Now, last year, after Ozzy passed away, Jack Osbourne shared one of our videos, which led to our work being featured in a number of news stories. It was an incredible experience, and we're grateful to everyone who found us because of it. I'd love to hear from you, so leave a comment, let us know where you're watching from, your favorite Ozzy album or your favorite memory. We're streaming on several different platforms today, but YouTube is our home, where we just passed 37,000 subscribers. So if you enjoy this kind of classic rock content, I'd love to have you join the community. Now, let's get to the next episode. Hey, if you're a Black Sabbath fan, then today's video is for you. Now, one of the things that seems to drive this channel is our shared experiences. And I know that because so many people leave comments down below our videos saying, man, I had that same experience. I went through that same thing. I remember hearing that album for the first time. But I had a very, I think, really unique way that I got my first Black Sabbath album. And since today is July 5th, and this is the final day that, you know, Black Sabbath's going to appear together, where you've got all the original members, and I thought maybe this would be a good day, since their whole theme is back to the beginning, to share kind of my funny little story, how I ended up with this album, Black Sabbath's, their debut. Now, as you know, this album was released on February 13th of 1970. So when it came out, I was less than a year old. But it wasn't until many years later, of course, that I would get it. And what it was is I was in a scout troop. And I don't know, I must have been 13 or 14 years old. And I was starting to play the guitar, got my first electric guitar, and I was starting to listen to a lot of hard rock and heavy metal music and that kind of thing. And my scoutmaster one day showed up to one of our, patrol meetings or troop meetings? I can't remember what you called it. But he showed up one day with holding a record. And it was this one that you're looking at right here, this actual one. And he came up to me and he says, do you have any interest in having this record? And I looked at it, and I knew of Black Sabbath. And I think what had happened is I'd heard of them from the heavy metal soundtrack, you know, with Ronnie James Dio, but I didn't know a lot about them other than that song. And so he said, do you want this record? And I said, well, are you sure? And he says, my wife, you know, I've got kids, and my wife does not want this thing in our house anymore. Which is so funny looking back on it, like, my wife doesn't want it in our house, so here, put it in your house. Anyway, so he gave this record to me, and I remember taking this thing home, and I was pretty excited because this is, you know, Black Sabbath, and they were, at that point, you know, this would have been in the kind of early 80s, and they were legends. You know, everybody knew that name, everybody knew who they were, at least had heard of them. So I remember taking this album home and putting it on the turntable, and it was just kind of this amazing experience, again, that I think many of you probably also had, because you put that thing on, you hear it for the first time, and it comes on, and you hear the rain starting, and then you hear that bell in the background, and then you hear that thunder, and it's just kind of this setting this mood of just darkness and eeriness, and then all of a sudden the whole band together, boom, ba, ba, and they do that tritone thing, those three notes that right in that moment when they recorded those things defined an entire genre that would resonate all the way until today. Here we are in 2025, and those three notes still resonate. It started this entire movement, this entire sound that everybody knew as heavy metal, and it was those three notes. Just unbelievable. And then, of course, Ozzy comes in after a few measures with that line, "What is this that stands before me?" And the way he sang it, the whole thing was so amazing. And I remember sitting in my bedroom hearing that for the first time, just thinking that it was just one of the most amazing things I had ever heard. And it's such an incredible song too, because not only it captures both of the things that we would understand as heavy metal. And what I mean by that is we have heavy metal that is the really kind of slow, plodding stuff. And then you have heavy metal that's the fast rocking stuff. And that song had both things, complete with an amazing guitar hook. And it just, it encapsulated so much of what would define heavy metal over the next several decades. It was incredible. And combine that with what I think is one of the greatest album covers ever created. And when you look at this thing, it just says simply Black Sabbath, and it has this this British scene with this what looks like some sort of a witch or something on the front of it. And there's nothing else other than it's just all mood, and it's darkness, and it's this heaviness. And when you hear that sound, when you hear that song, Black Sabbath, the song Black Sabbath, you can almost just look at this picture and just feel it. It's just amazing the way they did this. And then, of course, you start going through this record. So I listened to that first song. I remember hearing that going, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever listened to in my life. And then it comes out of that, and then you hear that harmonica start with the song The Wizard. And just this next song is just so incredible. And then I remember hearing on that first side of the record, I remember the experience, all of a sudden hearing this bass solo. Ba-na-na-na-na. You know, I'm introduced to Geezer Butler and this kind of amazing bass playing that he would do. And then you have that song NIB. And I mean, that whole experience of hearing this album for the first time. And then, of course, the second side, the whole thing was just so amazing. And it's today, this record right here, this particular one, is one of my most cherished records in my collection. And not just because it was what introduced me to Black Sabbath, because of how I got it. You know, I had this scout leader that it was really cool because he was able to see me on a personal level. And he knew what I was interested in. And I don't know if his wife was really telling him to get rid of it. It wouldn't surprise me though. But the fact that he was willing to kind of make a sacrifice like that just to help make a connection with a kid, just knowing what I was interested in. And then it's impacted me for the rest of my life. This music. And so again, this album, this thing right here in front of me is one of my most cherished things in my record collection. And kind of a funny part of that story is that all these years later, the guy that gave me this record, my scoutmaster from back when I was a kid, is today my accountant. I took my daughter to see them on that last tour that they did. And one of the most disappointing things, of course, was that Bill Ward wasn't there, because Bill Ward was such an amazing, interesting drummer. And again, when you get back to that first song, Black Sabbath, you get introduced in some ways to the whole band in there. You know, you hear Geezer's really unique, powerful bass tone. You hear Tony Iommi and this skill of making these great hooks. You hear that guttural instinct that Ozzy has in his vocals, but you also get introduced to Bill Ward and his almost jazz approach to drumming. I mean, he was heavy and it was strong and it was powerful, overwhelming stuff, but you also could hear kind of the jazz influence in it when he would play. So he was just so great. So it was really disappointing to me when I went and saw them on that final tour that Bill Ward wasn't there. And they were great. You know, I loved them, and it was great to just be able to see them all together. And that was the only time I ever saw Black Sabbath together, you know, as Black Sabbath. And it was just amazing. And to take my daughter, we got her a T-shirt, and because of course my kids all know about all this stuff. And so that was a cool experience. But then to hear, you know, some months ago that they were going to get back together one final time, and it was going to be the original four guys. And then the whole theme then of this concert that they're doing today is back to the beginning. And this album really was the beginning. Came out in 1970. It's interesting because it was the beginning of a decade too. It was the beginning of heavy metal. It was the beginning of the 70s. And as we do a lot of times on this channel, we go and we find these old newspaper articles, and I thought it'd be really fitting today in context of everything that was going on with the final concert and discussing this. I found this really cool little record review about this album from April 8th of 1970. So this album is barely 2 months old when this review is being written. And this is from the Formby Times, and this is Merseyside, England. I loved reading this review because while so many critics didn't really like them back then, this guy got it. And so when I found this, I just loved seeing this. So the headline is The Ultimate in Heavy Music. And again, this is from April 8th, 1970, page 7 of the Formby Times. Black Sabbath, Vertigo LP. Black Sabbath turn out sounds which are as doomy as their title suggests on this, their debut album. They are a 4-strong group from the Midlands: Tony Iommi, lead guitar, Geezer Butler, bass guitar, Bill Ward, drums, and Ozzy Osbourne, vocals and harmonica. And you'll notice that it's spelled O-S-S-I-E. And interestingly, back then, a lot of these articles and things, they wouldn't even call him Ozzy, they'd call him John. So it was kind of a variety of things. It wasn't until later that it kind of settled into that O-Z-Z-Y thing that we all know today. This LP should not be played by anyone with a nervous disposition or by anyone who has complaining neighbors next door. The only way to appreciate this album is to play it with the volume turned to a maximum, with the speaker of the record player no more than 2 inches away from your ear. The sound, and you got to remember this. When this was being written, this is 1970. I mean, think about what was going on in the world at the time. This was so original. This was so unique. There was nothing really like this. They were, this super heavy, dark thing was kind of a novel idea back then, at least the way they were doing it. There just wasn't a lot like it. And this was a reflection of the world that they were from. So there was something really unique about this. And so for somebody to make that comment, that wouldn't be unusual to hear it today. But this is back in 1970 when this person's writing it. So the context, I think, is really important. The sound Black Sabbath generate is heavy and closely akin to their philosophies on black magic, which seems to be their current record-selling gimmick. Anyway, gimmicks apart, the album is complete value for money for any heavy music fan's collection. Now that albums have risen considerably in price, it restricts the record buying public to records which are real value for money. Vertigo, for their admirable recording and reproduction techniques, give that value which is so sadly lacking in many records, time-wise, quality-wise. Not often does a record come along which is worth saving the pennies for. This is the kind of, quote, once-in-a-lifetime record which cannot be overlooked. I mean, listen to the fact that this person sees this. This is in the same era where Led Zeppelin is huge. This is in the same era that Grand Funk is filling up stadiums. And for this person to see this, the value, the quality, the sound, that there was something super, super special here, which cannot be overlooked. It could even be described as the ultimate in heavy music. Again, thinking about that, Grand Funk, Led Zeppelin, that's the kind of stuff that was happening at the time. The tracks are side 1, Black Sabbath, the name of the group, and the title track. The Wizard, Behind the Wall of Sleep, NIB. Side 2, Evil Woman, Sleeping Village, Warning. And that's the end of the article. But I just loved seeing that here we were 2 months after this album came out, and this person just could see that there was something special here. And he was so right about it, because think about this. Here we are in 2025. We are 55 years later. And it is being celebrated that the four guys that recorded this album are going to get together for a show where people from all over the world, people are talking about it everywhere that this thing is happening, this event, because these four guys went and recorded this album at this time 55 years ago. And an album that was recorded basically inside of a day. For all intents and purposes, what they went into the studio and kind of recorded their live set. And then that was about it. It wasn't a lot of overdubs. It was very simply done. And you ended up with what may be, if not the most consequential hard rock heavy metal album ever recorded, definitely in the top most consequential hard rock heavy metal albums and ever recorded. And on top of that, a cultural touchstone because of its lasting impact. Because everybody today, part of the celebration of having them back together is that Ozzy is going to be, Ozzy's not doing really well from a health standpoint, and then he's back together with them. And I've said this on this channel many, many times before. It's amazing to think about the cultural impact that this ultimately had. Because I bring up this as an example. My mother, who I think watches every single show that I put on here, most of the time she has no idea who I'm talking about or anything. It's just me talking. But you say the word Ozzy Osbourne and she knows who that is. It's incredible to think about it, that these four kids that put together this album basically in a day had this lasting impact that was so huge that the lead singer, 55 years later, you ask somebody that had no interest in him or Black Sabbath, still knows his name. It's an incredible thing to think about the cultural impact that this album, this music, and the guys in this band had over the decades. So anyway, just since today is July 5th and they're playing that final concert, I thought it'd be it would be fun for me at least to get on here and talk about that, the moment that I got my first Black Sabbath album and how I got it and the amazing experience of hearing it for the first time. And I'd love, as usual, to hear your comments about when you heard Black Sabbath for the first time and when you heard this album for the first time. What was your experience like? How did it impact you? And how did it ultimately impact you in the years and decades after that?